Chapter 23, Time to Even the Odds. Caleb and Nico brought in a large sack of items they collected to help Chelina remove the bullet from Mr. Cardone's shoulder and placed it on top of the round table next to Seth's bed. Nico, you and Caleb are going to need to spread these blankets out across this bed first, before we can let Mr. Cardone's lie down, instructed Chelina, who was carefully removing the bandage that had been wrapped around Roger's arm. Whoever did this for you did a nice job, observed Chelina as she unwrapped the old bandage. Tom's wife and brother-in-law fixed this up for me, confided Roger. Chelina finished removing the bandage and stepped back to take a better look at his arm. Then she shuffled through the bag of items that Caleb and Nico had collected and set on the table, as Caleb and Nico finished spreading out the blankets across Seth's bed, like Chelina had asked. Mary Daniels had come in and was quietly watching from the corner. Chelina, if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know, inquired Mary. Thank you, Mary. I just hope you don't mind getting your linen stained. They will need to be washed when I'm done here, explained Chelina. I just wish I had some of the bandages and gauze from my house with us, but we can make do with what we have here. Suddenly, Caleb realized he did have something that could help Chelina, but struggled with whether he should bring it out right now. With all that was going on, it was a secret that, like many others, may soon have to be revealed, especially, he thought, if it meant saving someone's life. Chelina, I do have something else that might help you. It's at my house. Caleb hesitated and drew in a deep breath. I will be back in just a minute, insisted Caleb, running out the bedroom door. Caleb ran as fast as he could, back to his house and bedroom. A few minutes later, Caleb returned with a large duffel bag slung across his back. Setting it gently on the bed, Caleb reached carefully into his bag and pulled out the large red-colored nylon medkit that he had brought back from the cavern several weeks ago and set it on the round table next to Seth's bed. Everyone in the room was speechless as Caleb unzipped the bag and began pulling items out from inside the bag. Chelina stepped over to the table as Caleb was unloading the kit. Where did you get this bag, Caleb? She asked with growing curiosity as item after item was laid on the table. I found it, mumbled Caleb, stepping back from the table to let Chelina have as much room as she needed, giving her access to the rest of the kit. Chelina looked over the items one by one, with amazement, as she shuffled through each of them, pulling out items that she could use. Here's some sterile gauze, iodine wipes, a thermometer, bandages of various sizes, and this, oh my heavens, Chelina stopped and pulled out a smaller black nylon bag. Here's a complete surgical and suture kit. Caleb, where on earth did you find all this? Asked Chelina with a mixture of anxious curiosity and amazement. Chelina continued shuffling through the bag until she found something flat that had been tucked purposefully into one of the large side pockets of the bag, and she carefully pulled it out. It was a book, and she began reading through it. This book is an emergency medical handbook. It's dated August of 2030? Caleb, everything in this kit looks brand new. This is stuff I've never seen before in my life. Chelina exclaimed. Well, can you use it? Caleb asked. Chelina started to laugh, and then stopped herself. For a second or two, she wasn't sure whether she should give him a big hug or slap him. She was smiling at first, staring at Caleb as her expression slowly turned stern and serious. Caleb, you just increased my ability to help Mr. Cardone's by a factor of 100, but when we are done here, you are going to have to explain how you found all this, understand? She asked. Caleb glanced sheepishly around at everyone in the room, first Mrs. Daniels, then Nico and Mr. Cardone's, and finally Chelina. I do, and I will, he replied sheepishly. Good, well let's get started on Mr. Cardone's then, ordered Chelina, as she began organizing the items on the table that she would need. Caleb stepped back to allow Chelina and Mary space to organize what they needed as he thought quietly to himself, wait until they find out what else is in the cavern. Caleb and Nico had been sitting outside for the last half hour on the porch of the Daniels house finishing up a cup of hot tea, awaiting word from Chelina on the progress of Mr. Cardone's surgery. A large group of men, including Caleb's father, Joseph Daniels, the McNeils, and several others, were gathered around the long table on the Daniels porch, discussing the incident that took place last night at the McNeil camp, as well as waiting for word on Mr. Cardone's surgery. Mary Daniels sent Elsa outside to find Caleb. "Caleb, Chelina wants me to tell you that Mr. Cardone's bullet has been removed. The surgery went well, and he is now resting. He should make a full recovery in a week or two," whispered Elsa. "Thanks, Elsa. I will pass it on," replied Caleb. Joseph Daniels turned around from the table after noticing Elsa speaking to Caleb outside. "What's that, Caleb? Any news yet?" he asked. Caleb quickly relayed the news to Joseph Daniels. Cheers were heard from the group of men on hearing the news about Roger Cardone's, especially the McNeils. "Caleb, would you come over here a minute? You too, Nico," insisted Joseph Daniels, motioning for the two of them to join in with them. "We've all been talking about what happened last night over at the McNeils' camp. Do you remember when they first got here earlier this afternoon?" Daniels asked. Caleb and Nico stood up and moved over to the long table, standing between Uriah and Joseph Daniels as Joseph continued with his question. "You said your group left Nico's village south of here earlier this morning, and it was about a 2-hour ride. Is that right?" Caleb and Nico nodded. "Yeah, we came up Trail 234, the old Dumfries Trail," explained Caleb. "Why? Did you happen to see any other people traveling along the trail on your way here?" Uriah asked. "No, we didn't," replied Caleb. "Okay, well thanks anyway, boys," nodded Uriah, turning to face Nico. "We are sure glad that you and your Aunt Chelina decided to come along this morning, Nico. Maybe when things settle down a bit here, we can get together and make proper introductions with your family. Do you think they would like that?" asked Uriah. Nico nodded. "I think they would enjoy that. We don't often meet a lot of friendly people," explained Nico, who started to turn around with Caleb to return to their table. Caleb stopped Nico and placed a hand on his shoulder to turn him back around. "Dad, there is something else, something we forgot to mention earlier this morning with all the commotion that was going on," explained Caleb, hesitating at first, then taking a deep breath to continue, as he realized there might be a connection. "When we were in Nico's village early this morning, many of the men in his village seemed concerned about some strangers that were traveling south along their border. They sounded a lot like these scavengers everyone's been talking about," continued Caleb, gently nudging Nico's shoulder. "Nico, tell everyone what your people saw." "Some of our scouts returned from the woodland border and reported a large group of men on horseback, about 20 or more, traveling south along the trails of the woodlands, which are down along the old 95 trail. They reported that all the men were carrying rifles," explained Nico. There was a silence as he finished. "That must be them," mumbled McNeil, scratching his chin. "What do you suppose they're up to?" Joseph, who had been intensely listening to Nico, started to turn around again as Caleb grabbed a hold of his shoulder. "But wait, Mr. Daniels, there's more." He continued. "Tell him, Nico," urged Caleb. "Before we left to come up here this morning, the men in my village were gathering up a large armed group to go out and monitor the strangers," explained Nico. "Oh my, do your people have rifles, Nico?" Uriah asked. "No, we don't. We have crossbows, bows, and knives, but no rifles." Daniels reached over to Caleb and Nico, patting them each gently on the shoulders. "Well, thanks, boys. The two of you've been very helpful," continued Daniels, turning back around. "Now it's just too bad we don't have any rifles ourselves. Then we could deal with these scavengers on fair and even terms." Caleb froze. He was solid and motionless. For a few seconds, he felt as if his hands and feet had been turned to stone. Caleb looked up at everyone sitting at the table and caught his brother's eye. Stephen was looking straight at him, as if he too must have had the same strange feeling. Now, Caleb wondered if only there was one of us who could make their mouth move. Then, it suddenly just sort of came out. "That's not entirely true," mumbled Caleb, low enough that most around the table missed it, except for Nico, Stephen, and his father, Uriah. Uriah immediately quickly turned around, staring at Caleb as if stunned. "What's that?" asked Uriah. "He said that's not entirely true, Dad," echoed Stephen. What's not true? Asked Daniels, seemingly unaware of the covert discussion that was taking place behind him. Uriah placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, gently turning him around, and glared at both Stephen and then Caleb. Okay, you two, start talking. What's going on that you're not telling us about? Demanded Uriah. Dad, blurted Stephen, we know where we can find some rifles, he continued, keeping his excitement in check. Caleb and I found them a few months ago in an old buried bunker we found, a couple of miles northeast of here, he continued, along with hundreds of different kinds of books, medical supplies, and other types of equipment. Some we don't even know what they are used for. Well, why didn't you tell us about this earlier? Uriah asked, staring at Stephen and then Caleb. Caleb gulped slightly, because we were afraid the council, Uncle Zachariah, would probably want us to destroy it, he explained. Uriah was speechless, shaking his head back and forth. I don't believe it. Daniels coughed. Right, Zachariah would probably have wanted the council to do just that. You know as well as I do how the elders feel about the children reading any of the old books that aren't biblical. But this is different than just finding some old books, quipped Daniels, stopping in mid-thought. What condition do you think they're in, Stephen? Like brand new. Whoever put them in there sealed those guns in airtight containers along with ammunition for each one, explained Stephen. Did you happen to take account of how many guns there were? Uriah asked. Stephen thought quietly for a moment. I'd guess about 60 rifles, some with scopes, 3, maybe 4 dozen pistols, and extra ammo for all of them, suggested Stephen. There was also some other stuff too, continued Caleb, looking at Nico. There are several complete medkits, like the one I gave Miss Chelina earlier, and other equipment that might be useful, like binoculars and even maps. Daniels looked at Uriah and then around the table at all the other men, who were all sitting with their jaws hanging down. Daniels, along with several others, let out soft whistles, damn, just like a bazaar of old. For several minutes, the conversation level turned into something akin to the buzzing of bees in a hive, as each man around the table began to spew forth their personal ideas of what should be done next. Caleb stood there quietly and watched, almost wondering if he made a mistake in bringing it up. Too late now, cat's out of the bag, he thought. He then turned to Nico. What would you do if you were me, Nico? Caleb quietly asked. Nico leaned in close and whispered, run? Caleb started to laugh. During the buzz of conversation, Stephen had come up behind Nico and Caleb. Well, little brother, looks like you started up a real storm now, he snarled, pulling Caleb gently around to face him. You and your friend Nico follow me. We need to come up with a plan for what to do next, whispered Stephen, motioning for the two of them to follow him away from the others. Gray Eagle quietly moved up closer to the front of the group, as several of the younger warriors had already taken up observation positions high in the trees. The scouting group from Nico's village had spent the better part of an hour stealthily shadowing the group of armed strangers, using the trees and terrain to hide their movements, when Jacob Waddy was the first to notice the group of strangers beginning to make a turn to a more westerly course that would put them heading directly into their territory. Jacob, who had found what he believed to be a well-concealed observation spot on one of the branches of a large oak tree, let out a short shrill whistle, which immediately signaled an alert to the others. Hearing Jacob's whistle, Gray Eagle immediately pulled back his position, moving around the right. Of the dozen or so warriors mingled in with the forest and trees, a person would never have known they were there, unless they knew right where to look. Unfortunately for the warriors, Dominguez was determined to prove to Mr. Rawson and the others that they had not been seeing things. Dominguez held up his hand to stop the rest of the group, and then motioned to Wilkes to join him. Wilkes, are you seeing or hearing anything unusual out there in those woods to our right? He asked. Wilkes hesitated, trying not to appear obvious. Well, sir, have you noticed the trees? He asked. Dominguez gave Wilkes a puzzled look. Trees, what's wrong with the trees? Look to our right, along the forest line near the trail. Do you see the etchings in the trees? Dominguez glanced over at the tree line, doing his best to do so discreetly, then his eye caught something etched into the sides along the right side of trail. You see it now, about 70 yards or so out to the right, asked Wilkes. Yeah, looks like eyes carved into the tree trunks. When did those start? Dominguez asked. About a quarter of a mile or more behind us, shortly after we made the last turn onto this narrow trail, this shortcut that Mr. Montez wanted us to take, continued Wilkes, motioning with his head slightly to the back of the group, where Mr. Montez and Rolando were conducting a conversation. Yeah, and I'm hearing some strange noises coming from the trees too, remarked Dominguez. I don't like the looks of this, Mr. Dominguez, hissed Wilkes. What do you think we should do? Dominguez turned around to view the grouping of the men and wagons in the rear, then whispered to Wilkes, Mr. Wilkes, pass the word among Rawson and all the other men to spread out in a single file line and then move the wagons up to the middle. Tell them to keep their eyes open and watch out for anything unusual. Wilkes turned his horse around and proceeded to calmly pass the word around to each of the men in the group, except for Mr. Rawson, Montez, and Rolando, who had already begun moving up hastily to the front of the line with Dominguez to see why the others had stopped. What's the delay now, Dominguez? Hollered Montez, with Rawson and Rolando close behind. Sir, I'm not so sure this shortcut is such a good idea if you ask me, explained Dominguez, keeping his voice low and noticing the indignant expression on Rolando's face beginning to form. He motioned for Montez to come closer. Sir, take a look to our right. Do you see the markings etched in the sides of all those trees? Montez glanced along the right side of the trail, and then he too caught sight of the etchings in the trees. I see them now, like little eyes. Yes, those are the markings I'm talking about, continued Dominguez. I think those are territory markings of some kind. Someone is trying to send us a message to not trespass here, he insisted. Montez glanced around at the men, and Wilkes, who had already started to return to the front of the group as the wagons were being moved into the middle. I ordered Wilkes to thin the line and move the wagons to the middle and alert the men to keep their eyes open. We are being watched, sir, assured Dominguez. Rawson edged his horse up close to Montez. Perhaps we should turn our team around and try another trail a little farther south of here. Rawson suggested. You too, Mr. Rawson, teased Rolando. Is there anyone else around here who's not spooked by a few trees and strange noises but me? Dominguez wasn't sure who fired the first shot, except that it had suddenly awakened the otherwise sleepy woods all around them. As the gunshot reverberated throughout the forest, the nearby woods erupted into a cacophony of sound, as if every bird and animal that made noise had suddenly sprung to life. Got one, yelled Wilkes, on his horse, who was near one of the wagons. They're hiding in the trees. Everyone could hear the crack of a tree limb, and then saw a lone figure dropping out of the trees, then landing on the ground with a loud thud. The sounds of gunfire began to erupt all around them as other men began firing into the trees. Some were taking aim, while most were simply firing indiscreetly into the trees, not as much concerned with hitting a particular target, so much as breaking up the boredom of a long ride with nothing better to do. Montez had his pistol out and was still trying to get a clear focus on something, anything that he could aim and shoot at, when he noticed something flying towards him from the trees, out of the corner of his eye. Suddenly, he felt the strange sensation of something he would have compared to being punched hard in the chest, followed by a cold stinging sensation in his ribcage. Dominguez had already jumped off his horse and taken up a cover position near one of the wagons, as he saw Montez falling to the ground. Straining his eyes into the trees, he could see movement, but whoever these tree people were, they seemed somehow to blend in with the woods, becoming nearly invisible. Amazing, he thought, as he took aim at movement near the top of one of the taller pine trees near the trail in the rear of the group. They were that close to us the whole time. He marveled. As he fired, he saw something fall out of the tree and land on the ground. For a second there he thought he saw it move. Dominguez continued to watch, aim, fire, and wait as he thought again, if any of us get out of this alive, we'll be lucky. Once the roar of conversation among the men at the long table regarding Caleb's revelation to the others had finally died down, Uriah and Joseph whistled for everyone's attention. Hey everyone, listen. Stephen and Caleb have come up with a plan on what should be done to best distribute all the rifles and deal with the scavengers. Uriah paused to let the conversation die completely down before gesturing to Stephen to continue. Go ahead, Stephen. Tell everyone what you just told me, urged Uriah, stepping back to let the boys through. Now wait a minute, hold on here, insisted Brian McNeil, holding his pipe in his hand as usual. Are we letting some teenagers dictate to us what we can or can't do with these guns? These scavengers stole from us, threatened us, took our food, and burned our property. We have a right to vengeance with them, he croaked, waving his pipe in the air. Brian, we understand how you feel, and we are trying to help, but this is all new to us, pleaded James Rickton from the end of the table. I say, the boys found the guns, let the boys decide what to do with them. Sounds of disapproval went up from some, while others sounded agreement. But James, they're just kids, this is too big a decision for them, I say let's vote on it, stormed McNeil. Now Caleb might be too young, but Stephen's old enough to make the decision on this, I say let him speak, exclaimed Harvey Redding, who was sitting next to Daniels, finishing off a leftover biscuit. Uriah looked at Daniels as if pleading for him to intercede before he began to lose his temper. Daniels loudly whistled again for attention. I agree, let him speak. Go ahead, Stephen, tell us your plan. Stephen looked at Caleb hesitantly and then at all the men and started speaking. What we're going to need is about 2 heavy wagons to make this work. I know that we have 1 heavy wagon that's ready right now, here at the Daniels house that we can use, but we'll need at least 1 more. We have another wagon that we can get ready in just a few minutes that's over at our place. Mr. Daniels, my dad and I will take the first wagon and go out to the cave and load up as many crates as we can, probably 2 at the most. They are heavy, so I figure we can probably load at least 2 on each wagon in addition to the ammo crates. Then Mr. Rickton, Nico, and Caleb will go get the other wagon ready from our place, and then they can follow behind us as soon as they are ready. Caleb, he's just a kid, this is far too dangerous for him to get involved, griped Redding. What does he know about handling guns? I'm not a kid, I'm almost 17, piped Caleb, growing frustrated with the conversation, as Stephen elbowed him slightly. We know Caleb, besides Mark, what do any of us know about handling guns, replied Daniels, as he watched Harvey Redding slide back in his seat, giving Daniels some small satisfaction. How far out is that cave that you boys found? Inquired Tom McNeil. It's about 3 miles up the river northeast of here, continued Stephen. I figure it will take us about an hour to make it out there, maybe 20 minutes to load up the wagons, then about an hour to get back here. There were several minutes of noisy discussion around the table, as all the men began discussing their own plan for the guns among the others. Finally, Daniel spoke up. Well then, I say we let these young men get started as soon as possible, decided Daniels. Stephen, Uriah, and myself will get the first wagon ready. Caleb, you and Nico go over to your place and start getting the other wagon hitched up and ready, and then meet us out at the cave, continued Daniels, looking over at Stephen. You sure you find this place again, right? He asked, somewhat jokingly. You bet we can, responded both Stephen and Caleb simultaneously.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.